So as we go into more off seasons with this new CBA in place, the NBA players are starting to recognize that the rules have become very restrictive. First of all, player movement has been slowly stripped away. A lot of productive players, I would say guys that would rank anywhere from the 15th best player to about the 25th to 30th. Guys that are co-stars like Julius Randle, Jimmy Butler, James Harden. A lot of these guys have barely gotten pay increases, even though the NBA TV deal is twice as much. Julius Randle right now as the co-star alongside Anthony Edwards, coming off of 2 All-Star seasons and 2 NBA selections, has taken a negative 16% pay increase. Even guys like Emmanuel Quickly right now is making more money than him with way less responsibilities. Jimmy Butler is another player that basically almost had to hold out during the regular season and force a trade to the Golden State Warriors in order to get paid. James Harden, coming off an All-Star season with the Clippers, has only gotten an 11% increase. And the same thing would apply to Brandon Ingram. Being a second overall pick, still productive. The deal he took in his 7th season only gave him an 11% increase. So under the old rules, a lot of these guys would have gotten normal pay bumps. And this is under the old TV deal, which was for way less money. And just to add more nuance on the restrictions of player movement, Jonathan Kuminga and Cam Thomas both are restricted free agents, which basically no longer exist because no other teams have cap space due to the fact that they're scared to hit that second apron. So the NBA overall, with all the teams, they're sort of hard capped. There's a lot of restrictions on what happens when they do hit that second apron. It's not necessarily about the luxury tax bills. It's all the restrictions on improving teams' rosters. Guys have to fish in the minimum player market, while at the same time, if they continuously hit that second apron from year to year, they end up getting their first round draft picks 7 years out, pushed all the way back to the end of the first round. So in this segment, we're going to hear from a few NBA players as they wake up to the reality of this new CBA. We're going to hear from Cam Thomas, Duncan Robinson, Georgia Yang, and former player union president, CJ McCollum. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
I was fortunate enough to, see some of the changes that have occurred in the league. Obviously, seeing free agency in 2017, right, when there was a big spike in, pay and performance, and seeing the COVID years, right, 2020, what that was like. We went into kind of preparing for the bubble, working alongside CP, and just kind of seeing what went into going to the bubble, what went into that season, that return to play, what that looked like from no fans to having fans, all those things we went through, and then to the last CBA we just went through, and then just seeing the new TV deal and how great the game has continued to look at, how great the game has continued to grow. I think the game is in a great place, and there's obviously things that we can do better as athletes, right, in terms of our day-to-day stuff, but there's also things that we can do better in partnership with the league, right? Like, the CBA is not perfect. Like, I've never gone on the record saying that, but everything's negotiation. And I think we're at that point now where the pod is continuing to grow. Guys are continuing to make more money, and there's a lot of conversations about mid-level. There's a lot of conversations about the non-taxpayer at mid-level. There's a lot of conversations about the vet minimum, the max, and kind of where things are. But from a statistical standpoint, we're heading in a really good direction. Guys are making more money, and the mid-level is not being neglected in the statistics show it. Although there are some things that can be improved upon in the CBA. Obviously, we talk about the second apron. We talk about aggregating salaries, and, there's a lot more player movement right now.
No, CJ, there's not a lot more player movement. There might be player movement among the mid-level guys, but as far as the top guys, only Paul George in recent years really is the only one that hit free agency. You see, there's a number of things happening right now. You got older stars who are not necessarily aging out compared to other players historically, and at the same time you have a large pool of global talent coming into the NBA from all the years of investment that they've made throughout the various countries, just coming up with development camps, etc., etc. So there's quite a few things that are culminating at the same time, and it's creating this sort of bubble of too much talent being in the league. That's what we're hearing of expansion talks so much. But that might not necessarily be a good thing, because you never know, the next generation of stars might age out a lot earlier due to all the professionalizing that's happening from a youth standpoint. You see Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Stephen Curry, they're almost like the last of the Mohegans when it comes to guys that are coming up through AAU, but they didn't necessarily at a very young age, almost at a professional level, just become so specialized, like guys like LaMelo Ball and that newer crop of generation that's coming into the league. That's why those guys are breaking down a lot quicker.
People have talked about free agency, how there's changes. A lot of guys are moving more than they have before, and there's also more parity in the league, and there's a lot of things that are going on within the league. But this wasn't like a my agenda type of situation. We had a collective bargaining agreement to try to do what's best for the players, and things were proposed, and we had to kind of have a conversation about it to kind of figure out what was best. But all in all, I think we're heading in a good direction, and the more dialogue that we can have, the more conversation that we can have in terms of ways to grow the game, the more players can continue to voice, their thoughts and opinions more so amongst us as players, so that we can kind of go to the bargaining table and have those discussions. I think it'll be better, but I think the game has grown immensely, from 2013 to 2025. Guys make more money. Our licensing checks have increased, and you look at the TV deal, and you look at some of the things that we've negotiated on behalf of the players through the union, including our 2K deal. Like we're doing really well.
Apron stuff's been obviously a big topic last couple months. Is some of this just there's the way that the league is covered is different? And so that there's always been a cap. There always been these different restrictions for team building and things like that. But things are amplified in a way differently now because there's so many, whether it is social media or there are people that are covering the details of these things differently than maybe they were, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I just think that's, across every league right now, you're seeing that just in different ways. And that's kind of how our league is being scrutinized in a way and looked at in a very critical lens. I think part of it is that we have such big voices as a group, and there's not many of us as NBA players, compared to maybe some other leagues or some other leagues of similar pay level. So I just think that's what comes with it, and it's something that we'll continue to deal with and something that we'll continue to address. And obviously we want what's best for our game. I think the fans want the most entertaining, competitive product possible. So, all the dialogue, in my opinion, is, in some capacity, just trying to get us towards, a really good product.
Even with the second apron, I think it's important to realize, teams on average are spending more than they ever have before. And if you look at what's happened historically with the salary cap, right? With average teams spending, reaching the luxury tax hold, like let's say, there's obviously some people have referred to it as a hard cap. A hard cap is something that you can't go over. Second apron is...
It's basically become a hard cap, CJ. Teams definitely do not want to go over that. It's not even necessarily about the tax dollars. It's just so much restrictions that come from it. And in a way, it gives owners an excuse not to pay people. We've seen Luka get traded because of the cost that would happen around his contract. Not necessarily his contract is the reason why the Mavericks got rid of him. They just weren't confident in giving him the money and then spending extra money of putting a competitive team around him and paying luxury tax every single season, while at the same time being reduced to how they can improve the team going from year to year. God forbid that they get an injury, it'll be very hard to replace certain key guys, because if you go over the second apron, you're restricted on what players you can actually pick up, the way you could do trades, no more 2-for-1s, salaries have to match exactly to the T, and also your first round picks 7 years out get pushed back to the end of the first round. So this has basically become a hard cap. And in a way, the owners, they sort of worked it out with the players where it looks good on paper. They get 53% of the revenue. But under these new CBA rules, we've seen it comes with a lot of restrictions. The 65-game rule, which is also attached to individual awards like MVP and all NBA team selections, which those awards are also tied to players getting certain Supermax deals. Tyrese Halliburton so far was one of these guys that almost fell victim to not getting a max deal because he came down with an injury, and we've seen him almost risk his career in order to get paid. These were not stipulations that were going on in the last CBA. Guys were protected. If they were stars, they got injured during a contract year, they would still get paid. We see certain guys that are top picks As long as they're performing, they will still get paid. This is no longer the case today. So on paper, a lot of these things look good. Teams are spending more money, but at the same time, teams have a lot of excuses of reasons why not to pay guys. Going back to 2017, the NBA owners were not happy about all that player movement. So they aligned the contracts in a way where players would have to sacrifice money if they wanted to leave teams. And players still ended up making that choice, which cost these teams a lot of money. Think about the jersey sales. Now a lot of jerseys have to almost be put up for free or put up for auction because you got guys like Paul George leaving teams, Kawhi Leonard, etc., etc. So player movement has not been good business for the NBA owners, and they have slowly crafted out player movement in this new CBA, as well as reasons why not to pay guys.
A hard cap is something that you can't go over. Second apron is it's like a hard cap, but you can actually go over it. You just have to come out of pocket for it. Historically, the last 10, 20 years, two teams have historically gone into what would have been an invisible second apron over the last, 15, 20 years. We know who those teams have been historically, but I think the important thing to remember is that the middle class, is not being affected. I think they've talked about that. There is more movement. Guys are getting traded more. There's more movement. Teams are strategically kind of figuring out when they would like to spend money, right? Based on what free agents may be available. There's a free agent that could be available from the Milwaukee Bucks soon. Like there's things that are occurring within the league that may deter teams from wanting to spend money. But I think the biggest thing is figuring out what the members want. Like that's the biggest thing. Like I didn't devise a plan to try to like conquer the world. Like I don't have that much power. I didn't have that much power. I didn't have that much control. It's important that members kind of express themselves, especially to the committee and to the union as to what they really truly care about, whether that's protecting the middle class, whether that's protecting guys that are on minimums, salaries. Like those things are really really important, really crucial.
And those things are hard for players to make happen because we have to keep in mind the average lifespan of an NBA player's career is 5 years. So there's constantly a revolving door of players. And at the same time, if you look at the player reps for most NBA teams, it's really the guy that's at the end of the bench, because most players who have a voice don't want to spend the time and effort to commit to such a task that's really being done for free. Again, we just seen CJ mention he did everything he could with the power he had, going up against all these billionaire owners with teams of lawyers who have history of just understanding contract language. They crafted this new CBA very well to get rid of player movement while at the same time getting a lot of TV revenue coming in and making it hard for those players to cash in on that revenue split. It looks good on paper. The NBA players take 53% of revenue, but when you see guys like Tyrese Halliburton almost not get a Supermax deal, had to almost risk his career while playing injured just to hit the 65 games so he can get that Supermax, you see where things begin to get a little shaky
in terms of development and growth within our league. But I think the moral of the story is a lot of guys and girls work hard behind the scenes to make sure that we have what we need on a day-to-day basis, whether that's support for guys from the mental health side, whether that's education, whether that's advancement, whether that's opportunities. Obviously, there's a lot of, confrontations that players have had, whether that's with referees, whether that's with specific teams. There's problems that players are having right now with, being in contract years and their minutes being changed or being receiving DNPs consistently. So like there's a lot of issues.
AKA Jonathan Kuminga, he's having a lot of issues. Same thing for Cam Thomas. The Nets are leveraging the fact that most teams do not necessarily have the cap space to pay him. So what does restricted free agency really mean for these two players? Does it really even exist anymore?
Issues that we have within this league, and the union's job is to try to figure out ways to help people. But I think there's a misconception that players aren't being compensated the same ways they have in the past. That's not true. Guys are making more money than they ever have. The middle class is making more money than they ever have before. But we do need to figure out, how to prevent, like there's a lot of player movement. Guys are having to leave their teams to get more money. Like other teams are spending money, like Dennis Schroeder,
I don't know why CJ keeps saying that. There's a lot of player movement. Paul George is the only superstar in recent years that has hit free agency. For the most part, everybody else had just re-signed their deals. You could even make the argument nowadays you have to almost force a trade in order to get the contract that you want. We've seen Jimmy Butler force a trade to Golden State and get that contract that he wanted. Same thing for Brandon Ingram in a way. Had he not gotten traded, who knows what kind of deal he would have gotten in the open market. And being a second overall pick in his first opportunity to get a large contract, he barely got a pay bump. And this is with him being a productive player. He may not be an all-star or a superstar, but he's still productive for being a top 2 pick. Normally those guys get a nice little pay bump in that first year of eligibility to get a real contract.
He was able to, $15-16 million when he wasn't able to be retained by his team. People talk about the Celtics. They talk about, certain teams getting off salary or making decisions, but it's also important to remember that injuries impact decision-making, right? Unfortunately, Jason Tatum gets hurt. It changes the trajectory of that team. It changes teams' windows.
Injuries have always impacted players' salaries, no matter what decade or what era of NBA basketball we're talking about.
Goes out, with an injury that changes Indiana's perception of that team. It changes the window for a little bit because, one of the star players, best players is going to be out. But, saying that the middle class has been destroyed or that, they're not, getting their fair share or their fair amount of money, it's just factually not true.
And also with the new CBA, we're seeing something that has never really been done before. Teams that have 2 or more players with high salaries are actually keeping two-way guys on their roster, or players that have a lot of guys with high team salaries like the Knicks, where they're paying OG Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns, and Jalen Brunson. They're keeping a lot of G League guys in their 14th and 15th slot. So now a lot of teams are starting to adopt the fact that they can keep a bunch of two-way guys on their teams, and they really only have 13 guys with guaranteed contracts. That's been a new trick that NBA GMs have been rolling out, and eventually the landscape will end up being there's actually less guaranteed spots.
We have the stats.
But one thing people don't understand is what your stats portray and what you think you're worth is not sometimes what you're worth. It's like what you're worth is what someone's willing to pay you. Like that's really what it comes down to. So where it's like, oh, I averaged, 13 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. I should be getting X amount of $1 million. Well, that's great. But if one team has cap space and you don't want to take the mid-level,
it's not flawless, but it's all a negotiation. And I think there's a lot of noise around the lack of player movement because there used to be a lot more big splashes in free agency, and now it's more of an extension league. If we're being honest, a lot of guys are getting extensions because teams may have money and may not want to spend it, or they may not have it or want to dip their toe in that. And you talked about it. How many teams realistically have a chance of winning a championship every year?
Yeah, maybe 8 to 10. I mean, think that they can have a chance to. To your point, I think part of, and you sort of mentioned it, you said in 17 it was 4% were max. This past year, 9% were max. So you're talking about that number has more than doubled, going from 4% to 9%.
Since 2017.
Right.
But before the new CBA kicked in 2022, 2023.
It was the same 9%.
Yeah.
But to your point you were making earlier, that's also coincided with the facts that the max contract is as high as it's ever been because it stayed relative to the cap and the cap keeps going.
Now, one thing they didn't mention there, because those numbers are interesting, is the fact that from 2017 till now, you have a more globalized talent pool coming in, and you have a lot of aging stars who are not aging out. And also, the rise of two-way players really taking up the last 2 to 3 roster spots because teams are trying to make the numbers match. So you have less roster spots available to players overall, going from team to team. And at the same time, you have a globalized talent pool coming in, and older players are not necessarily aging out, maybe due to modern medicine, or just it could be the current crop of generation. They're just really that durable. You never know.
So what you're seeing is public outcry of the discrepancy between what guys were making and what guys are making. Now, I actually believe, and I think you could make a strong actual argument, like a guy like Steph Curry is probably the most underpaid guy in the NBA in terms of what he means to a franchise. So I'm not over here saying guys shouldn't be making, this, that, or whatever. Those max guys are in reality what's driving the league. it was, I mean, I was just in the meeting, so it was interesting to see that middle market has stayed the same, because I didn't necessarily know that the numbers supported it, but there has been this like public narrative. And that's also just insight into how public narratives can create quote unquote truths that aren't actually there. Like you get people talking about, oh, the middle market's gone or whatever, when, like you said, it very much is exactly the way it's been.
Yeah, but it's not perfect, and I don't think anybody's going out and saying it. There's things that need to change, and as we kind of maneuver through the new waters of the CBA, we got to have those dialogue and those conversations. Minimum guys got to be speaking about their experiences, what it's like. How was your free agency? Mid-level guys, how is your free agency? What's it like? We know that free agency has shifted. It's changed. It's more of an extension league, and that's where we're at.
Those mid-level guys, it's going to be hard for them to speak up because a lot of them, they don't really last long in the league. Again, the average career span of an NBA player is about 4 to 5 years.
But also, more and more teams are going to have money off the books, especially when, like you said before, teams operate based on whether or not they can win. Like, is this our window? How old are our best players? What's the average age of our team? Who's on a rookie deal? Who's not? Who do we have to pay? Who's extension eligible? All those things. And I think another thing that we have to fix in the CBA, and we'll have a discussion about it, and obviously I'm not president anymore, but you shouldn't be punished for drafting well. Like, if you draft well, we've seen some teams be really fortunate in the draft, and now you get to that position Oklahoma City's going through right now, where you got to pay a lot of players who are really good and you draft them. You shouldn't be punished for drafting well. You should be able to pay and keep and retain the players that you've drafted. And when you have those windows to where you really have a chance to compete and win a championship,
we're going to see how they navigate through those windows, because it looks like OKC is setting themselves up to pay their top 3 guys. And at the end of the day, a lot of their mid-level to kind of lower tier rookies, they're going to rotate them in and out with all those draft picks that they have. Once guys like Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, Cason Wallace, and even Lou Dort to a degree when he starts getting up there in age, they're going to phase out of these guys real quick and start rolling some more rookies with all those first-round draft picks in. But that won't be the norm, because OKC, the way their team is set up, it's a rarity for sure. But they will begin to show the rest of the league a blueprint of how small markets can navigate through these treacherous waters of just paying all these guys these large contracts.
you shouldn't have such severe restrictions. But those are things that, you know, the league and the players union will have to figure out, and there will continue to be a discussion and a dialogue around it. But I think the moral of the story is everything is a negotiation, and the league has done a great job of continuing to help, you know, build up the league and be great partners. And I think we've done the same as players, but now it's about collectively figuring out how to make sure that we are putting all our players in the best position to succeed. And the last thing I'll say is one of the things we got to figure out, right? Looking at, you know, a situation where a player is potentially in a contract year and the team, you know, figures out a way to devalue them. Like how do we fix those types of things too? Because those are problems.
How often do you think that happens?
You've been watching the league. Can you name some situations in which that's occurred in the last 2 years?
I would say Brandon Ingram, Cam Thomas, Jonathan Kuminga, the Jimmy Butler situation. Unfortunate for Miami and Pat Riley, they actually violated that rule about resting your superstars. So those suspensions that Jimmy Butler was receiving was actually unnecessary. He wasn't injured. It's not like he was not showing up to work and doing what he had to do. The Heat just chose to discipline him. They were low-key devaluing him in the open market because they knew that he had a player option. They were hoping that him opting into his player option would be his only choice because teams would not be interested.
I mean, I think
You have to do it because we play.
I think that it's hard to, yes, probably, but I think it's hard to say from my vantage point. I think it's hard to say if you're not in the locker room. I think that people are very good at, you know, there's two sides to every story. And like there's an example right now in the Bay. I think that you could probably they would probably there'd be a different conversation about what's going on up there. But I'm like,
AKA he's talking about Jonathan Kuminga.
There's one side from the players, there's one side from the coaches in the front office, and I'm like, I'm not gonna say who's right. You know, it's like I feel like you have to be there for them, but I'm more curious, like if you think that that's a thing that happens frequently and it just doesn't usually get out. Like, it doesn't usually become like a media story.
I don't necessarily think that it's like teams are consistently not playing good players so they can pay them less or so that their market is dried up. But teams will make you go get an offer sheet. Like, go get an offer sheet and bring it back. Like, that's common practice.
That's the business of it. Like,
And also with the Kuminga situation, teams are not necessarily looking to throw a crazy number out there in order for Golden State not to match. We've seen Jeremy Lin get a deal like that in the past as a restricted free agent, leaving the Knicks and joining, I believe it was the Houston Rockets. That $25 million a year, that was the number that really scared the Knicks away from matching. So teams today in that landscape, due to the CBA and that second apron serving as a hard cap, they're not necessarily willing to throw out those kinds of numbers, knowing that they have to extend rookies and they also have to build a competitive team around a certain number, not trying to get into that luxury tax.
if you say it's like real estate, they're in the business of buying low and you're trying to sell high. I mean,
Yeah.
we knew what we got into when we signed up for this. So, I mean, as you know, as crazy as it is, like those scenarios, I try not to play them in my head because I don't want to live life cynical and be like, that actually would be something that happened. So I just try and like eliminate that piece out of my mind and just try and focus on like my daily habits and what I'm going to do every day. Because when you start thinking about, oh, they're not playing me because they're devaluing me, then you start actually not looking the best you can be because you're worried about all that other stuff that's going on. And do I think it happens? I really don't have an answer on it because I'm not really focused on that aspect of the basketball game, if I'm being completely honest, as a player at least.
I think we've all seen some experiences in which bonuses, things of that nature, games played. I mean, we all have heard stories of.
But that's only one side.
Yeah, but you can kind of watch a game and. What do you think?
Now, CJ right there just asked Duncan Robinson, former player of the Miami Heat. He was there when Jimmy Butler was around, going back and forth with Pat Riley. And Duncan Robinson just completely laughed. And the way CJ even asked him, what are your thoughts? CJ had this biggest smirk on his face. They already know what it is.
I mean, I think front offices obviously have their own agenda in how they're trying to figure things out. I will say, I personally have been in a situation where if I was probably in another organization, I wouldn't have been put in the situation that I was in, without speaking too vaguely. But when I got paid to come back to Miami, I think there were a lot of organizations that, well, you got paid, we paid you, we're going to play you. And I got put in a situation where I was out of a rotation. At least I knew every day when I showed up in Miami, they were trying to win. And they were doing what they thought was best for the team, in that I got moved from the starting lineup, taken out of the starting lineup. For me, obviously, that's a million things. Back to G saying, like, I'm trying to focus on my habits, this, that, whatever, get through that moment. I do think, because there was like people telling me, oh, if any other place in the league, like, you know, this wouldn't have happened to you. They paid you, they would have rode with you. One, also because if you pay a player, you want to keep the value up in case you do need to trade. You know, because I've been on both sides of the trade stuff. When I was early on in my career, and I wasn't making anything, I was an asset in a trade. When I got paid, they couldn't get off me. They would have to attach a pick, and I was valued more in Miami maybe than I was somewhere else. So to that point, I think, of course, a front office has an agenda. I don't know that it always correlates onto the court. I'm sort of in G's camp where, like, I would like to think, and maybe this is naive and altruistic, I would like to think that coaches are going out there every day trying to put together the group that's going to help them win. To the point in the Bay, they've won championships over there. It's hard. I can see the other side of that, where they're like, look, we're trying to make a run, like we're trying to do something. And that's no knock on JK. I mean, he's an amazing player. I just know there's two agendas, right? There's the player side and there's the front office and the coach's side as well.
There are definitely multiple sides to this equation. But one other side that we have to factor in is also the agents. What are they thinking? Because definitely in today's landscape, even though there's a lot more money, all the factors that will create the optics of scarcity are definitely there. And agents will act on that. As we'll hear from the leader of Clutch Sports, LeBron's right-hand man, Rich Paul. as he spoke on the Brandon Ingram situation and how he had to get him traded in order to get a deal because they were not sure if there was something available in the open market. Again, keep in mind, we're talking about a second overall pick who's still productive, putting up 20 plus points per game.
I went through it this year with Brandon Ingram, having him traded from New Orleans and then during his deal during the season with the Raptors. But that's because I felt like had he got to the open market, there was not much opportunity there. So he's making $40 million a year for the next 3 years. That probably wouldn't have been there for him if we get to quote unquote free agency, you know?
Damn. He's almost making the same amount of money in his rookie scale deal, and they had to make a lot of maneuvers just to make that happen. With Brandon Ingram, this contract only equals to an 11% pay increase. A player with his stature in the last CBA would have got at least 4x the pay bump. And finally, the last part of this segment, Brian Windhorst actually revealed the truth about the new CBA, in which the true number is about only 10 players can actually earn the Supermax in total. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
The reason that rule exists is they don't want somebody to get their first max contract and then force a trade and then still get the Supermax. They want you to have to stay through your whole first contract to get the Supermax. And then once you sign the Supermax, you're not allowed to be traded for a year.
Yeah, right.
So they want to prevent you from even like getting the Supermax and going, ha ha ha, now that I got it, I'm out of here.
Well, remember, it used to be too that you can only have 2 guys on per team.
That's right.
So that went away with this CBA.
Right. So, by the way, I had a executive tell me the other day, you know, with the new CBA, there's really only 10 max players in this league.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, there's certainly circumstantial max.
Right.
Like, no offense to Paul George in Philly. Right. I mean, I think that's kind of a circumstantial based on the based on everything that happened there. And but yeah, there's probably a handful of guys.
Yeah, but I would thought Luka was on that list.
Yeah, I thought too.
So it is what it is. As more off seasons continue to go by, the players are starting to wake up on how this overall landscape is really going to turn out. And if you're outside of the top 10 to top 15 players in the NBA, guys like Julius Randle, Jimmy Butler, along those tiers, they're really the ones that are going to get hit hard the most. The guys in the middle are the ones that are really going to get the pay bump, even sometimes surpassing the co-stars, the guys who sit in the top 15 to, I would say, about 25 players in the league. This situation played out with Emmanuel Quickly. Today, he has a larger contract by a few $1 million over guys like Julius Randle. But as the off seasons continue to go by, we'll have a better understanding and have a lot more examples of how teams and GMs are just maneuvering through this overall landscape. The changes are already noticeable, but it's still a little bit too early to judge.